But I might email him a link to the Google Slides. too.
Yeah, maybe just do that. You know, why didn't we create a QR code? It's easy.
Yeah, good
apparently.
question.
Apparently, you remember how we used to create shortened forms of URL? Apparently, there's a website that does QR code.
Hello. Hi. Welcome. This is a session on publication bias. That's what you're looking for. Any luck?
Yeah.
Would it be quicker if I send you the link, or yeah, and maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe we can just scroll through a PDF.
Yeah, I could just scroll through this for you as you go along.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, as long as it's like is reasonably full screen, then it's fine.
Yeah, she had something back, you know, it was a lot. And my mom started this fancy thing that tells you if you're paying attention. Does it have a coffee cup symbol? Yeah. How do you know? I know, yeah. My mom's has the same thing and I'm like, why is there a coffee cup?
So you have access to the IWAC email address? Could I just send it to that email?
Yeah.
Should I just do that?
All over.
What's the, why don't I do that?
Do you have access to it?
Yeah. it's-
Okay. Okay.
What's the email? IWAC 2023
Right.
at Gmail?
Yeah.
I'm not actually sure if that it is IWAC 2023 at gmail.com.
Okay. Up there.
All right, I just sent it. Oh, not yet. Hold on.
Oh, yeah.
Share anyway.
What do you want to see?
Oh, yeah.
It's the IWAC email. I don't care. I mean, I think it's just their,
I thought you had it already. I look.
Yeah.
no, I just email it to them. And then it went through. Maybe it was the. I think you did it.
Or whatever, you know. Yeah.
You have to speak in that.
There it is.
My
Microphone.
mom.
I think so, yeah.
Really funny. Well, there. She got.
So we're tag teaming, so
Yeah.
I think we'll just.
Well, the air conditioner one.
Still have- Not need this anymore.
You know, so that the air
So,
will turn on.
And say hello,
You know,
take us through the outline, and then you've got the first,
you know, like.
you know the drill, girlfriend.
No.
You know the drill, girlfriend.
Well, I do, but I've just been, I'm so glad that I used this time to like go through it.
Oh,
Because as you said, we tagged you, so I have to know
Didn't know it.
what's my next. And
Right.
Right.
So there's one point where we can have the drop there as well.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't even necessarily know. On the language of science.
And.
I was just gonna mention about how English and also Latin were are seen as kind of the objective. Transparent.
Because now that ethos has been trusted.
Right. Okay, yeah, okay, let's stick with that. Thank you, I'm so sorry. I
Oh, you're
didn't
welcome.
do a good job of that.
I have to say, program did a good job with you guys. We're so thankful. Like,
Oh my gosh, we would
we would
be
just be.
without all of you, yeah.
Yeah, coming to next year for doing something.
Doing great.
No, thanks to me.
Sarah, right?
I am, yeah.
Thank you. I was just saying, thank you for all the logistical support you built in.
Y'all are gonna sleep hard tonight, aren't you?
Yeah. So much.
It's been very helpful. You walk like 1,000 miles.
I wish I wore my Fitbit. I'm like, I'm gonna put like 4 miles down the last couple days.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've been going.
If you're carrying your phone, it measures it.
That's a good thought. I didn't even think to check it. That's a good thought.
So
I
are
saw-
you staff here or?
We are at the Peer Center.
Oh, okay.
Are you the new,
Has never.
Ramirez?
So much.
No,
When I was a student.
she, really?
Yeah.
That's so funny. So I was here in 2019 and she moved to engineering the same year.
Oh,
So she's still working with writing, but she's doing, she retired and then came back.
okay.
Yeah, she's been around for as long as anyone has ever seen. I don't
That's so
think that.
much institution.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So I'm now, I'm like the admin there and I'm also the program coordinator.
Okay.
Then Allison also works in the Peer Center. So we're like the new generation.
Well, good. Good. Thank you for.
It's been fabulous.
Thank you. That means a lot. But we had lots of small issues. So like hearing the positives is really good.
But it's like, the minute there's an issue, they're appearing, like, today.
They do, yes. I have my phone number. They're having, yes, yes. I just hate that the shuttle went so poorly, but once again, I can't fix it. So
Yeah.
let me go.
Some maybe that's out of your.
Out of your wheel.
It is. Well, yeah. I saw you just emailed a link to a Google Doc. That's why I'm here.
I sent it to him, which he received, because I stupidly uploaded my slides as a PDF.
Yeah.
I have no idea why I did that.
So
And it
she had to
didn't
read
show
the-
well on the screen, so I
Gotcha.
sent him my.
Okay, as long as he got, I just want to make sure. I was like,
Wicked.
he doesn't have this email, so I want to
So
make sure. he
that's why
got
you
it.
show up.
That's why I'm
I
telling you.
wanna-
guys.
I want your energy. That
When
was
I'm here, I'm
proud.
on. When I go home, I'm like, okay, don't talk to me. Look at that. I got one thing. I would like to watch one TV.
You just totally deserve that.
Yes, I'm done.
Is he watching the Zoom?
Yes.
Part? Okay,
Yes.
so I'm not gonna worry about that.
Yep, you're good. He's got the Zoom. He's got everything you need to do.
And will I need to, when we're speaking, should we be sharing the microphone?
if you're speaking the same presentation, just, this one. Yeah, this one.
Oh, we
This
don't need
one's
to pass it.
awesome. There's no passing.
And can you pick it up from wherever?
Yes. Are you gonna present from here or where are you thinking you're gonna talk?
Probably out in the middle, I think.
Where it doesn't matter. It'll pick up anywhere. I was just gonna move it. If you're gonna like sit down, it's gonna.
No,
pick
we're
up.
not gonna.
Okay, you're good to go. It'll pick up. I tested this morning. It's still good from over there. So you're set.
Great.
Anything else I can help you with before I go?
No, should we just start?
What time is it?
10:30.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, is that a 10?
Let me go.
Yeah, so the sun is somewhere there, and my shut off the melon, so we run away to a pool that. Yeah.
Good to see you.
And you should be good to go.
Okay.
And you got the.
Uh,
I'll give it to you.
Looks like it's not plugged in. We used this.
Still, okay. The clicker is very angry.
That's fine. Can I just tell you when it's?
Yeah.
back?
Yeah, it'd
Great.
probably be easier that way.
No problem.
Yeah, he's much more reliable than. Thank you, Jonathan.
I've never been to the UK.
Hello, everyone. It's 10:30.
Yeah.
So we'll get started. Welcome to the last session of the amazing IWAC. I'm honestly delighted by the turnout. Given the place in the program and also that we're competing against the likes of Chuck Baserman and Ann Blakesley and Terry Zawacki. So thank you for coming out. My name is Megan Callow and I come from the University of Washington in Seattle. Josie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, and I'm Josie Warema. I am also at the University of Washington in Seattle.
And Josie and I will be tag teaming on this presentation called Addressing Publication Bias in Non-Western Research Contexts, Implications for WAC Programs and Western Universities. So if you could take us to the next slide, please. I'll take you all through our outline. So for this presentation today, we wanted to tell you about this concept of publication bias and tell you a little bit about a study that we have just kicked off. But leading up to that, we're going to talk a little bit about publishing in science, this topic of publication bias and other related issues. We're going to make a little digression into the language of science We'll talk about power and difference in science publishing. Tell you a little bit about our study so far, and then, bring it back to WAC because that's why we're all here. Think about implications for WAC programs and possibilities for reform in publishing and in WAC and in higher ed more broadly. And we should have plenty of time for Q&A because this is the only presentation, and I guarantee you we're not going to take up an hour or whatever. Yeah. So next slide, please. And this is Josie's.
Okay, before I start, I want to acknowledge my professor is here in the room, and so if I'm nervous, blame Lee Morrissey. And all of you, my peers who I've learned a lot from, so thank you for being here. So I'm going to start with some context about scientific research, which also has similarities.
I'm so sorry. I forgot to tell people about handouts. I made access copies if anybody would like one.
Okay.
Forgive me, please. I know the slides. The slides and our notes.
Oh, okay.
If you wish, you don't have to. Actually, I'll just ask you for digital.
Okay.
Yeah, no. Good. Okay.
Sorry, Josie.
Okay, no problem. I bought flowers when my daughter graduated and I forgot to give them to her. So that's that. So scientific research is a social process, as we all know. It is collaborative, it is international, and it takes place sometimes over the careers of people's lives. With research being carried out, we know that research findings are typically shared with other scientists and the general public, but mostly with other scientists through scientific journals. And scientific journals are critical to scientific research and careers because their editorial and peer review processes act as a check on new claims and findings, which is a good thing. And researchers build their careers on the list of journal articles that they have published. We all know this. There is not, however, always agreement on scientific findings. Scholars of the rhetoric of science have advanced the idea of rhetoric and incommensurability, which suggests that the correctness of a given interpretation is acceded to through a process of persuasion. In other words, scientific facts are not independent of interpretations by scientists, and what is often published is a result of a consensus, more of a consensus, as we have read from Thomas Kuhn and Paul Feyerabend. Needless to say, this process of persuasion means that scientists often disagree. And that is a good thing, because that disagreement allows for refinement. When findings are placed in the scientific record, even more scientists get to examine those findings and produce further adjustments, and eventually theories become knowledge. This work is done by humans who live in their respective communities and are or may be burdened by their social and political ideologies. Thus, the quality of the end result is as much a product of the science as it is of the scientists themselves. As you can imagine, this position is controversial because the notion that scientists are subject to human error and frailty weakened science in the public eye, as we all witnessed during the height of the pandemic. As the science that was agreed upon yesterday became adjusted with new knowledge, became revised, the public, which is conditioned to the notion that science is settled, lost trust in the science. However, a public that is educated in knowing how scientific consensus is attained as part of the process that corrects for human errors is critical. This brings us to the backgrounds and identities of scientists and whether or not they change the outcome of research. There was a recent publication titled "In Defense of Merit in Science." And that publication argues that objective truth is absolute and therefore not subject to human influences. This position completely omits errors made in the name of science by notable names like Darwin, whose incorrect assertions about race and gender no doubt reflected, even conformed to prevalent social mores of the time. Indeed, the theory of evolution itself, as we know, was refined over time, over decades, and over many points of view. Megan.
Next slide. So that context, based on our reading, scholarship, teaching of scientific and technical writing over years, and other recent experiences, which I'll tell you about in a second, have brought us to this phenomenon of publication bias. So I think one of the biggest kind of triggers of this pursuit for me was a recent experience where I was invited by researchers at the School of Medicine at the University of Washington to give a writing workshop. It was a large grant kind of collaborated on between UW, University of Washington, and researchers in Kenya who were doing a very large scale HPV vaccination trial. And they were, and there are a lot of clinicians involved in this research in Kenya. And these researchers were struggling to get their work published. They were doing lots of kind of side channel research projects, like offshoots of this larger HPV study, and they were struggling for a variety of reasons. So they reached out to somebody at the Writing Center at UW, and that person said, well, you could talk to Megan Callis, she does science writing. And so I developed this 5-week workshop with these clinicians, and it was really illuminating. The kinds of things they were telling me anecdotally about the barriers and struggles they were facing in terms of getting things written and also published. So based on this kind of collective experience, we define publication bias as the disproportionate acceptance for publication of scientific research in English, I should have added, conducted and written by Western scholars. And I define, there are some kind of more nuanced definitions which are on the handout, which includes the fact that studies of non-Western locales and populations have much lower publication rates in high impact science journals. Studies by non-Western researchers also face lots of barriers to publication, irrespective of where and whom and what they're studying. Rejections may be on topical, methodological, and often on linguistic grounds. Researchers experiencing the longest delays to acceptance are based in Asian, African, or South American countries. And this is based, that's not anecdotal, this is based on studies we've uncovered. And studies accepted, this one really gets me. Studies accepted by non-Western researchers or in non-Western settings may display or may be encouraged to display unusual or unique findings that tend to kind of exoticize the populations that are being looked at. Conversely, Western studies are assumed to be internationally generalizable. Next slide, please. As we were doing our research, a couple other related issues came up that I wanted to just define for you. One is this idea of helicopter research, which is where researchers from high-income countries kind of swoop in, hence the helicopter metaphor, and conduct research in a host country with inadequate recognition of local researchers, staff, and or supporting infrastructure. Many of you may know Linda Tui-Weiss-Smith's Decolonizing Methodologies book. She really addresses this issue in that. One recent analysis found that while half the articles in top 4 medical and global health journals describe research in an African region, only 30% didn't, 30% of them did not list a local author. And then citation bias, which is the idea that researchers are much more likely to cite articles in their own languages, which given that scientific research, 98% of scientific research is published in English, becomes very much a self-perpetuating cycle and increases the impact of English language articles. So based on another study, white first and last authors, and in case you didn't know this, in science, the first author is kind of the person who like spearheaded the work. And then the last author identifies the mentor of the person who kind of occupies a mentoring role. So first and last authorship is important. So white first and last authors are cited 5.5 times more than expected, and non-white authors are cited almost 10% less than expected. Next slide, please. So as we were kind of learning more about this topic, these questions just started to emerge for us. Where is scientific research being conducted and by whom? Whose research is being published and whose research is being cited? So these questions guide us as we continue in this work. Next slide, please.
Right. So as Megan just said, statistics estimate that 90% of modern scientific research publications are written in English language, right? And because of that, there's the expectation that if you're going to publish in the English language, you better have the competency and the expertise to publish in the English language, because this facilitates the circulation of your findings nationally, internationally, etc. And so what follows is sort of a very, very abridged version of the evolution of the English language as a language of scientific publication. According to Fife, Markhan, and McDougall-Waters, the hegemony of English took place over time and was made possible with changes that they have identified as widespread literacy, the development of the printing press, and geocultural war-thing issues. So first, the spread of literacy meant that there were more people who could now read written forms of text, and therefore this reading could be done in a multiplicity of languages, because before that it was just Latin. Latin had the hegemony, and if you had the ability to read Latin, that means you were. It was very classicist, right? You had the chops to be able to read Latin, but the printing press made it possible for other languages to be written and to be read. The printing press also made it possible for languages that were known as vernacular languages, i.e. not Latin, languages such as German, French, Greek. They began to, scientists in those who were speakers of those languages began to publish in their own language because they wanted their people to read what they had published. And moreover, Latin was not anyone's mother tongue. So eventually this spread of language in science brought impediments such as, well, because Latin was a specialized form of language, and somebody who was brought up Catholic, and my grandfather was who wanted to be a priest, but he didn't, and because of many, many things. But the language of Catholicism, like you had people spoke in Latin, and my grandfather would read things in Latin, and because it was the language of God, I guess. But then that meant that you had to go closer, like you had to rely on somebody who had that expertise so that they could read these things for you, right? But ironically, when things began to be published in vernacular languages, other people were like, well, what if other people can't read French or German or whatever? So then that is sort of gradually led to English, but English became so because, German was aggressive in world wars. And according to, what's his name, Gordon? In the United States, some of you may know this, the United States, Midwestern states, about 10 or 15 of them had language as German as a dominant language. And so people used to speak and write and teach in German. But when the World War started and Germany was considered an aggressor, the United States, as you know, is very reactionary. They passed laws that said, no more German, right? Everything has to be done in English. So the diminishing of Germany in the United States and the rise of English in the United States led to, among other things, the rise of the English language, right? And so, but it has brought complications that Megan mentioned that have something to do with preference for native speakers of English, which has dogged scientists all over the world, and has also led to the global use of language that is different, right? A different use of scientific language. So, for example, while non-native speakers of English are taught formal English, which values active verbs, complex sentence structures, use of imagery, Gordon writes that the language of science has evolved from its formal roots and is now characterized by, and I'm quoting here, the passive voice, simpler sentence structures, fewer subordinate clauses, limited use of metaphors. And all of this is done because it supposedly conveys neutrality. So in essence, the language of science has become a dialect in itself. And it has become a dialect unbeknownst to non-native speakers of English. So while they are writing in English, they ought to be writing in science. Next slide.
I was just gonna add one other
Sorry.
thing too. No, it's okay. We keep referring to this great book by Michael Gordon called Scientific Babble, which charts the rise of kind of the hegemony of English in science. And Gordon points out this really interesting point that English and formerly Latin were considered as kind of the most objective, transparent and neutral languages for communicating science, which is in itself a kind of a meta language that has embedded within it deeply positivist traditions, of course, where the empirical facts are mirrors of reality, unchanged mirrors of reality. And that was the only point I was going to add on that. I recommend the book.
That's a good book, yeah. Is that me?
Yep. this is
Okay.
you.
Well, given the weight accorded to the volume of publications, for scientists, publishing for scientists has taken on very high stakes, as Megan mentioned. There's a discernible hierarchy in terms of positioning first and last authors, and the journal of higher impact, which has implications for PhD students and vulnerable scientists, based on one of the persons we interviewed for this project so far. And it also has implications for the costs of publishing. So we are learning that while there has been a move towards open access journal publishing, it's not free. You have to pay to be published in an open access journal, and it's not little money, right?
It's free to readers, but not to authors who have to pay to publish their own articles.
Right. But beyond all of these metrics, it matters who is doing the science, right? Who is asking the questions? How are those questions being asked? How are they being framed? And why? Because findings depend on those things, right? Depend on what questions are being asked. What are you looking for exactly? And even the conclusions, who is framing the conclusions based on the science? Because as we noted earlier, most of these findings are a result of persuasion. And even though we appreciate that the United States government has put in place these things like IRB and things like this that protect subjects, which we now call, in the humanities, we call participants, it has very minimal implication. It has maximum implications for international scholars because the US federal government funds a lot of science research. And so, as you know, every funding from the federal government comes with strings attached, even if you're located in the most remote part of the world. And so these protections for human subjects, and fraud and plagiarism, they don't have any implications for equity, right? They don't dictate, how researchers can conduct science equitably to prevent, say, for example, helicopter science. We've heard of scientific technologies that are ineffective in different racial skin tones, for example. Or I recently learned about a technology of EEG that detects abnormalities in your brain waves. But it wasn't, when they carried out that research, they didn't include among the participants people who have textured hair, like me, for example. And so when a Black woman goes to get an EEG, she's told that she has to shave her entire head before they can attach those electrodes to their hair. And women are naturally protective of their hair, right? And so, but I did read a little later that a student, I think Missouri or something, a Black woman found an easy way to do it. So she created an electrode that could detect, that could be used on textured hair, in other words. So again, it matters who's doing the science. It doesn't mean that the science was wrong. It just means that the science didn't account for people, other people. Additionally, there's a book called Mind the Gap, which catalogs the clinical signs and symptoms in Black and brown skin tones. When a police report comes up saying this person was beaten black and blue, you can beat me, like I'm not going to turn blue, but I would still have been beaten, right? So that does not account for my skin tone. And so it might mask the way that a doctor might diagnose me or fail to diagnose what is going on with me. So it doesn't, again, render the science factual, right? Rather less factual. It simply means that those scientists fail to account for other variables or people, if you will. And while there are so-called partnerships that are formed between researchers in there, and I'm going to use the term the global South and the global North, those researchers get treated more as field assistants than equal partners. And that, for us, I guess, is problematic because it means that they're leaving some important knowledge in the field, which is good for all human beings, I believe. Yeah.
So that brings us to our study. And I want to kind of give a couple disclaimers, which is that we launched this study earlier this year and we wanted to understand the experiences of researchers from non-Western countries. And we decided to recruit by, I went back to participants in the workshop that I gave. And we also asked colleagues at the School of Medicine and in the sciences at the University of Washington to share an invitation email. So it was kind of a snowball kind of recruitment effort. The yield was really low. We got very low responses. And I think, part of that is that the people we prevailed upon to invite others were busy. The recipients of the emails are busy. It's like, who is this email coming from? Who knows who this person is in the English department? But I also am guessing that it has a lot to do with the fact that we are asking questions about a very personal and vulnerable experience for people. So we applied for, and actually just before we came here, found out that we received the AWAC Research Initiative grant. You may have seen emails about that. So yeah, we're stoked, awesome. And we're hoping to, we're planning to use that money to offer honoraria to participants, which we hope will help incentivize their participation. I should say too that we are not just using money as an incentive, but are communicating ourselves as sympathetic understanding colleagues who really want to help change this issue. So our research questions are, and I realized last night that there's a typo here, forgive me. In what ways do scientific researchers who originate from or work in non-Western countries, ignore the located, for example, in the Global South, experience the research and publication process? What kinds of editorial feedback do these researchers receive? And how does this feedback, along with other gatekeeping, such as onerous publication fees, affect researchers' productivity and long-term career trajectories? Our preliminary findings. So we have interviewed one person so far, a doctor and public health researcher based in Nairobi. So I tell you these findings with the due caveat that these are not generalizable, of course. But I will say that our conversation with her was incredibly illuminating, and it more than amplifies the literature that we've read on the topic. So what she told us was that her manuscripts are much more likely to be rejected by high impact American journals, especially European journals a little less so.
And may we add that she has a PhD from the University of San Francisco, the medical school?
UCSF.
Yeah, that one. Go ahead.
This woman has like 5 titles. I mean, it's kind of amazing. I don't know how she gets her job done. But she's an amazing practitioner in Nairobi. And due to that kind of struggles and constant heavy revision requirements she was encountering with high impact American journals, she now focuses on either European or low impact journals. She says it costs $2,500 to $3,500 American dollars to publish in a high impact journal. We, in conversations the other night at dinner, I was hearing from you all that it can cost even more, up to $9,000. Just so that's anecdotal. She often receives feedback from editors to standardize her English. One reviewer said that her English distracted me from the science. She often receives feedback, and this accords with what I cited earlier from the literature, that she's encouraged to exoticize her research setting or her participant population. In one study she was conducting on food security, reviewers requested more quotes about hippos, even though they had absolutely nothing to do with her study. And we all had a big incredulous laugh about that. And yet, in her field, you won't get promoted without 12 first author publications and 8 last author publications. She works with a doctoral student, a Kenyan doctoral student, who is getting ready to give up on getting his PhD because they have a minimum publication requirement to obtain the degree, and he just can't get it. So the career impacts are very, very real. So she's given up on publishing as much, especially in high impact journals. The only time she'll even contemplate it is if she could write that cost into whatever grant she is pursuing. And she said that she has found more value in writing abstracts, in attending conferences, in networking. I mean, these are huge kind of human benefits, but they're not the currency of the realm, right? When you're in the field. So all of these findings, as I said, have really kind of reinforced what we've read in the literature, and then some, but I mean, it calls for more study, and so we hope to be moving towards that soon.
Yeah. In addition to that, this scientist, she goes to places where Western scholars will not go, and she's dealing with people. She can speak in the local language, and she can, like I said, ask questions and And these findings have implications for the well-being of those people and humanity in general. And so we think that scientists from all backgrounds are necessary if we are to decrease the chance that one prevailing set of views will bias the outcome, or that one prevailing set of views will dominate the publics. When COVID-19 started, for example, I read articles breathlessly proclaiming what a disaster it's going to be in Africa when COVID-19 hits. If Italy has been hit this hard, imagine how Africans are going to die. And Africans did not die to the level that Italians or even Americans died. And instead of finding out why, Western scholars are just like grasping at straws, right? And so having a plurality of scientists who have their work published has implications for more than just equitable findings. Findings that recognize difference and recognize difference as not a deficit, but a basic fact. And this means that science publishing, we think that it needs to revisit the way that it reviews and revisits the review and editing process. Of course, as academics in the humanities, we've all bitched about reviewer too. But maybe journals need to be more transparent about acceptance rates. Maybe that can help people sort of tell a narrative about why they haven't been accepted in certain high impact journals. Acceptance rates by region of the world. Maybe people will be shamed into doing good. I don't know if any of you have seen this, but the American Psychological Association put up an apology, apologizing to African Americans for all the years of systemic bias and scientific, so-called pseudo-scientific findings that they attributed to being Black. And it was very telling. It was an apology written in APA format. It's glorious. You should go and read it. But scientific journals, so I commend them for doing that, right? And I hope that they have now changed their ways. Scientific journals also need to re-examine formal and informal review processes, i.e. language diversity. Also, there needs to be a diversity in editorial boards. And when we talk about diversity, we don't just mean tokenization. Like if you put me at a table and you allow me equal agency as you are, I will tell you things that you don't know because you just don't know. You've grown up with a different mindset from mine. And so those revelations are good for all of us. We think that indexing regional journals in lower income countries could also be a factor. Research teams should be inclusive of local researchers without assigning them positions of like auxiliary support. Journals should also perhaps require reflexivity statements in which authors describe how they promoted equity and inclusion. Again, this is not just a liberal or wokeism, but when people are held accountable, I think they tend to reflexively reflect on their process. How did I actually do this? So even positionality statements, why am I actually interested in this? What do I bring to this work? And also a deeper understanding of possible links between racism and health is also a good thing.
And will enhance the quality of scientific research because science tends to shy away from that acknowledgement. So the call for proposals to this conference, oh, next slide. Yeah, here we are. Okay. Says, what do we want WAC to be? We see WAC programs as a kind of nexus, not just between writing studies and disciplines within institutions, but also between academic study and professional and community practice beyond. So for that reason, we view it as really important that WAC professionals stay cognizant of this and similar issues. And raise the issue constantly throughout their programming. I mean, I just came from an amazing panel about faculty fellows in the next room with an emergency room physician, a mathematician, and an engineering communications faculty. I mean, these people are really well positioned to learn about topics like this and communicate them and teach about them. So reform we can imagine in higher ed and in WAC programs, we can't underscore enough, and I know we're preaching to the choir here, but writing support for grad students in the sciences in particular. And not just that, but support that is compassionate, that creates safety, informative, iterative, and pedagogically conscientious feedback and learning communities. So many of the grad students we have in faculty we have worked with over the years have told us, especially in STEM fields, that I learned, you know, it was a trial by fire kind of immersion process in writing. I got feedback, sometimes incredibly difficult feedback on the writing that I did, but there was never explicit supportive instruction. Also resources, support, and training for STEM students, undergrad students, and faculty, focusing really on intercultural communication, translingualism, publication bias, other related issues. What does it mean to not just be a practitioner, but to publish your work? And what does that look like? And what are the barriers that people face? We also, as WAC practitioners, really want to advocate for grant allocations in scientific grants for writing workshops, for writing support. That's a really, and for publication support. It's an essential piece of scientific research and it deserves monetary support. And we also advocate for more transnational and trans-institutional partnerships. Being approached by this study that was taking place in Kenya, as I said, was a transformative experience for me. It makes me a better WAC professional. It makes me a better science writing teacher. So we have to keep pursuing those in whatever ways we can. Next slide. So one of the huge benefits of going last in this conference is that I have spent the last 3 days just like mainlining new articles and authors, and when the WAC awards were happening a couple days ago, the book award went to the Rutledge Handbook of Science Communication, I think is the title. And so I immediately went and looked that up and found and downloaded the Natasha Jones chapter and found a quote that just really speaks to this work. She says that silencing is often systemic and can occur without malicious intent, ill will, or even active engagement. With complicity, finding a path through heteronormative, patriarchal, Eurocentric ideologies that go unacknowledged and unchallenged in any explicit way. So the stakes are very clear. In another article, we cite on publication bias, actually written by a postdoc at the University of Washington. She says science can serve its true purpose, part of which is to reflect the true state of nature, only when it becomes more inclusive, when findings from non-Western populations are covered with equal importance as studies on European or Western populations. Thank you very much. I look forward to your conversation. Here. Ooh. Please.
Very much for the presentation. I have just one question for now. I was wondering in your interviews whether you would consider the role of not just the publication, like just the feedback, but also also of conferences. Because I know, really big conferences, they are attended by editors of the high impact journals. So, like looking at what some of these big, I'm only really familiar with biology, but like what some of these big, supposedly international conferences, what is actually how many people are actually coming from Australia, Europe, and in America and the US. And I would guess simply because of just with the barriers for travel and stuff. And I don't know, that might be a factor. Because, like in these conferences, people are exchanging, even just in poster sessions, people learn about works in progress. But that could be a barrier for people else in non-Western countries.
Great suggestion, thanks.
And then, but I don't know how much is being changed with, like this conference is hybrid, right? So I don't know whether that could help.
Yeah. Great question. And it also, it brings up a whole question about how bodies are perceived in person and how spoken dialects are perceived. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, sure. But I just think like in terms of exposure, I think part of the publication ecology is because, these papers are sent to folks that the authors probably already know in the field, right? So, when you have a paper coming outside of that network, it's like where, who would you send it to? So.
Thank you.
Do you know if there's any other work being done around this area? Or if not, this would be a good place to look to about like the psychiatric publication bias against patients, because with that power differential, a lot of that's the same, and especially with a lot of the neurodivergent academics like trying to get published, a lot of their work is overlooked while looked at the neurotypical people. So like, for instance, in the DSM-5, something like the autism diagnosis is fit for one white male character,
Right.
that it's to, and like misses so many people because it's non-neurodivergent people that are the only ones included in writing these. So I was just interested to know if there was any work including that in some area or possibly suggesting that.
Yeah, thank you. I think we can add that to the list of, we can look that up and see.
And we cite actually some psychological research in this presentation too. The call for reflexivity statements is from a psychology journal. But it's interesting that you bring up psychology and the DSM because for other purposes, I have read about just what a political process it is to update and revise the DSM, which is viewed as this kind of neutral, factual kind of catalog of human conditions. But there's this wonderful article about how when the DSM removed homosexuality as a kind of a deviant deficiency, that happened as a result of protest by activists, and probably wouldn't have happened without kind of concurrent social movements. So I'm glad you brought it up.
And to your point, I've been hearing about scientists from countries that have been talking about the, I don't know how they've termed it, but the visa as an onerous burden to people who cannot travel.
Yeah.
Like if you want to travel, you want to come to the US and you have to travel through Europe, you have to get a string of visas.
Yes.
And of course, the US State Department will take your money and they will not give you a visa, they will not give you a reason.
Yeah.
And so that's another barrier that scientists are encountering, that they cannot travel to these conferences, which are expensive to begin with.
Yes.
But they want to be present so that their faces can be seen and they can network and create.
Actually, I have another question. I'm just wondering, if I could get that question, what you mean by like, yeah, scientific research is such a huge term, and what I'm hearing just based on your presentation, it seems to be more. I just want to clarify, are you focusing on all science, like, physics, chemistry, or are you focusing more on like biomedical research, psychology, people who research that actually impacts like directly
Right.
people? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And we have narrowed it down. I mean, I think it will largely be defined as our participant pool gets defined. Yeah, but we're finding ourselves in a kind of a recruitment, we're at the mercy of our kind of recruitment process, which is very word of mouth.
Sure.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to push a little bit in the opposite direction.
Okay.
From Leslie as a question. So this is really fascinating, and all the things that underpin this because of the where I work reminds me a little bit of, I mean, there's a big global south problem in the social sciences as well. When you look at the 4 largest democracies in the world, only one of them speaks English. So I mean, I'm kind of curious as do you see positioning the research as it comes along in order to be a wider statement on academic research broadly, or is there some thought of examining this in the context of what it means for the social sciences as well?
What country is that, if you don't mind?
Well, the United States is the only English speaking.
Right,
So
the
Brazil.
global south.
So Brazil and Indonesia both firmly fit that, and of course India is going to skirt the line, but Indonesia and Brazil being the 2 larger democracies that sort of fall in that category.
Well, as you were speaking, I was wondering, I mean, because as we have learned, English was not always dominant. And I wonder if there's room for science publication in other languages, like being promoted. And so that it would be up to the, I don't know, who would be up to maybe journals to have that science translated. Because as you said, Brazil is a huge country. Imagine requiring all Brazilians to publish in English when their education system is not. The reason why it's assumed of other languages, of course, we know that Britain colonized all of these countries in Africa and India and Asia. And so the expectation is that, that the English language prevails, but also the understanding that, I don't know what the word is, but yes, there's English there, but you probably don't speak it well enough, right? And so I think that it would be great if we could go back to other vernaculars being promoted as languages of science.
As to your,
Sarah has a question.
and well, he had another question about social sciences and whether we intend to incorporate that into our research. I mean, sure, if you have participants in that, that kind of domain, please send them our way. I teach science writing primarily, and Josie is a professional technical communication scholar. So that has driven kind of our experience and interest, but I'm interested in it in all ways. One thing I will say too, though, is that the participant we spoke with is from a country in which English is one of the main spoken languages, and she grew up, it is her native language. Yeah, thank you. But it's not the same, it's not an Americanized, standardized dialect. And so there's that labor of translation. And then there's the next layer of translating kind of vernacular speech to scientific English. So global Englishes, I think, are just as discriminated against as non-English languages.
Well, it's interesting, so I'll jump back in a minute to what I'm, my Henry's work. It's interesting because we also know from studies of multilingual writers that perception of error is based on perception of the writer, not on the language. Yeah. Right? So people might be finding problems in her prose that they would not find if she had, you know, a German surname, or, you know, if she were at the University of New Hampshire with a German sounding surname, right? So that's an interesting thing too, the layers of racism and bias there. What I was thinking about, building on what you were saying, is you were talking about the 4 largest democracies in the world. Well, let's talk about the major scientific superpower in the world, which is China. Right? And I don't actually know a whole lot about what's going on in terms of how important it is for Chinese scholars to publish in English language journals.
They have their own set of journals.
They have their own set of journals, yeah. So I don't know much about that, but I think that would be really fascinating. I'm also just thinking about your recruitment. You know, I'm thinking about international scholars in the humanities and how they might, like visiting scholars in the humanities, wondering if they might connect you with science friends back home. I don't know if you're already doing that kind of outreach.
Yeah, we're leveraging all the
You are.
networks. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, like, are you working with any international scientific organizations?
No.
Not aside from the one that we're in, but
Okay.
no, that's a great idea.
Especially ones that are located, like honed in other places.
Mm,
So not like in the NSF doing anything in
mm,
India,
mhm, mhm.
but like in India,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
They're an association for the advancement of science and scientific publishing. Yeah.
Right, that's a good idea.
Great idea. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, like places in like, I mean, like Singapore or even Hong Kong, where you have researchers. I mean, I know Singapore, they poured a ton of money into the sciences, like where are they publishing? Are they wanting to publish? Yeah, it's not interesting. Yeah, are they trying to publish in West, or are they trying to publish? Yeah, because I do remember. Yeah, there's definitely a rise in Chinese journals, but I'm not exactly sure what their impact is.
Well, and coming back to the impact factor, coming back briefly, to impact factors, of course, that's a whole, you know, nasty little ball of worms. Because they were intended for librarians to know which journals they should retain. They were never meant to be markers of scientific quality. And I don't know if you know about the research that shows the rate of retraction. As the impact factor gets better, the rate of retraction goes up.
Oh, interesting.
Right? So there's actually a problematic correlation there. And so there's also the question of researchers who are choosing not to try to get into the higher impact journal. Because it's hard, part because they're trying to have to run survival. And partly because oftentimes they don't meet the actual needs
Of the,
of the publisher or the researchers and the people they're trying to help, the people they're trying to reach. So, I mean, not to turn your project into an octopus, I'm sure it's our committee are.
it is growing as you see.
Yeah, the factors, kind of contextual factors to consider.
Well, I know on that point also, I mean, just talking anecdotally with like biology researchers and like who normally it's difficult for them too. Yeah. So I don't know how, in terms of these, in your interview, you can quantify, you know, like what are we talking, like percentage of papers that get in after how long, because you know, the whole process is just, you know, it's harder to get funding, it's harder to be
Right.
published.
And there's a literature that captures that too, that quantifies it, the kind of average time to publication
Yeah.
for certain groups. But Chris was patiently waiting.
I just had a reflection based on Sarah's comment about China being a science superpower, and, you know, if China decides to publish in Chinese instead of English, you know, that gives them even more power over the kinds of research that they're doing. It just makes me think of, you know, when you all started at the beginning about how Latin was, it wasn't English that was originally, and how Latin was used, like the Bible was published in Latin. So you know, it's like, it was a keeper of knowledge and only some people who could read it, you know, within the churches or whatnot. Yeah. You had to go, you know, you couldn't have a relationship directly with a higher power, right? You had to go to church and it had to come through the priest, or I have no idea what I'm talking about.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. So it just makes me, it just is interesting to me, you know, if a large country like Indonesia or China, or, you know, decides, you know what, we're not gonna do this in English. I just is, I don't know, and because you know, I say to my students all the time, when we're talking about inner, outer, and expanding circles in terms of English, you know, and talking about the fact that there are more English speakers in that expanding circle. Well, what if that expanding circle decides they're in, you know, they want to standardize things, like who's, you know, who's in charge here? Or who's dictating, you know, what the grammar is or whatnot?
Yeah.
I don't have, I guess my question is, like, will there be a shift in the language that science is published in, you know? I guess that's my question. Not that you need to research that, whether that, you know, just to, I think to pay attention to, you're doing research, you know?
As you were speaking out, I just thought about an a Kenyan writer, actually, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who at some point was like, I'm not gonna write in English anymore, I'm going to write in Kikuyu,
Yeah.
right? Because I want my work to be accessible to Kikuyu speakers.
Yeah.
Well, and 100 years ago, you could not be a chemist if you didn't know German. Right? You could not be. I can see a time 50 years from now where if you want to do work in biomedical genetics, you gotta learn Chinese. I can see, I mean, it sounds really radical to
It
say
does.
that. But if 100 years ago you had said German will be obsolete in chemistry, people would have laughed at you. Like German was the language of chemistry.
Yeah, it was.
So, yeah.
That's also another interesting article.
Well,
You know what I mean? Like, no.
So one suggestion on the outreach, particularly if you're thinking about hitting specific countries or specific areas that you want to target. I would get in touch with the Fulbright office because we'll have a long list of researchers from all of those countries, and we'll have a list they will send out to get them a lot. So that might be a good way to be able to target specific countries. Maybe people more willing.
Thank you.
And then apply for a Fulbright yourself. You know?
All right, slow down, people.
You have a question?
Not a question, but just thinking back on what you said, I do research on the Middle East, so there is also a push because especially the humanities, you know, their English is not really, you know, good, that they teach everything in Arabic, but they need to publish. And then those high impact factors in English is that they're so expensive, like you said, there's a specific standard, so like, no, so they're all publishing in Arabic now. And Arabic journals like in Iraq now are pushing to be more of part of Scopus, but in Arabic. So there's this, it's gradual, it's not like it's big, but I went back a couple of months and I saw this push. While versus the science, again, they're also saying, well, it's the only engineering medicine that are really good in English. So then the others, you know, we don't know, we can't write in English. So maybe we'll do research in Arabic. So there's this push between Arabic and English. Which one do we choose? Which is more convenient?
I will say too that in response to the question Chris poses, and in line with this, Maha, right? That just in the 7 years that I've been teaching science writing at the University of Washington, I teach in a linked writing program. So my writing courses, the students in my writing courses are kind of concurrently enrolled in intro to biology courses. So I'm observing the curriculum in the biology courses. And there has been a real noticeable shift in the biology curriculum. It has become more humanized. It really is acknowledging kind of the social dimensions of science. It is making more of an effort to talk about race and racism and bias in scientific research. So that doesn't mean we're anywhere close to where we need to be, but the conversations are being had even in, first year science courses in ways that they were not at all being had 7 years ago when I started.
That reminds me, actually, so one thing is, given all the factors that you might want to consider, possibly narrowing to even just biomedical science. So say for example, as opposed to Scopus, say like PubMed, right? What's in PubMed? And you have a lot of psychology. I mean, you definitely have a lot of psychology articles published in that. So it will cover that. I'm pretty sure, I mean, I've seen articles like, in Chinese, I don't actually look them up, but I mean, like, the other thing is when you were talking about transparency, I was thinking like transparency also in like who the participants are, right? So there's this it's understated, like say trial psychology, they say the children are, this and that. They never say who the race is, but like if it's like who are the actual participants in infant psychology studies? They are going to be children of stay-at-home mothers. And who has the luxury of doing, I mean, but it's never acknowledged. Same thing with just regular psychology, the studies, who are the subjects? They just say college students.
Right.
Who are those college students? They'll say this gender, but they won't say any, beyond that.
The NIH has created new standards around naming kind of participant demographics.
Okay.
But it can be problematic. I mean, it has good intentions, but has created problems too. I think we might be over time. Is this end at 11:30? Oh, 45. Okay, good.
Yes, somebody.
Lee has a question, please.
I wish,
Ah,
I mean, I'm thinking. So, what's happening seems to me in the room is there's a lot of excitement about your project. There's a lot of excitement. And it's been described as an octopus. But the illustration seems to have been a pufferfish. And I think that, one thing I wanted to mention, and there's a second, but one thing I wanted to mention is how do you get it to be the octopus that it is when you only have the single pufferfish? And I'm not sure I don't have the answer, but Josie might. The mention you made toward the end about OMG, if it happens to Italy like this, what's going to happen to that?
Yeah.
But it didn't happen. In fact, it happened here more than anywhere else. It happened in the symposium, one of the 4 symposium months. I think that may, in order to handle the octopus, you're going to need time. And you're going to need more pufferfish. And that may be a way to catch your pufferfish. And when you have your pufferfish, then you can apply for the funding that we all think this deserves. Because the way you're going to interpret this material is already clear. What you need are the participants and the time. And I think that your angle is the one that would work today. That is for a funding agency. We need now to reflect.
Yeah.
When it comes to scientific writing, the world health crisis, why the world's oldest supposedly continuous democracy failed, where other countries supposedly less well positioned did better. And you have participants now on the ground already in Africa with whom you can work on this project, and who may be interested in this project, and certainly have something to teach the world through this project. That's one thing. How to turn the pufferfish into more pufferfishes. And I think it's your story, your anecdote at the end. That's how a lot of us are doing our research projects. What we wound up focusing on in lockdown is now our research. That's okay. So it'll be understandable to the funding agencies, but you're going to need The other thing I would say is, it's hierarchy all the way down. And racism is one of those, but it's hierarchy all the way down. And I think that's the issue that you're confronting. And maybe hierarchies are shifting, maybe we have a whole hierarchy of emerging. But that's not going to take away the problem of hierarchy itself. And hierarchy is interfering with thinking. And that's huge. I say this with my own experience. There was a delay in getting one of my books just rejected. I wound up talking to the editor of the well-known press, which ultimately we did publish the book. It's my second book. If you want to find out who the press was. They apologized for the delay. They had lost their administrative assistant. They needed to hire someone, and they accepted a bunch of things that I came while she was being interviewed. They rejected a bunch of things, and then there was a third pile of proposals that they could not judge, and I quote here, solely on the basis of the letterhead. And I was in that third pile. My project was better than my Clemson letterhead. And at that Ivy Plus University Press, they didn't know what to do with it because it screwed up their hierarchies. They accepted this pile of letterhead, they rejected this pile of letterhead, but there was something on this particular piece of letterhead that was better than the letterhead.
Wow.
And that's all the way down, up and down. I haven't thought of, so relatedly, this hard question, I haven't thought about the prospect of paying for open access. But I was on a committee at the same university with the mediocre letterhead, low hierarchy letterhead, where they're trying to change the research profile of the university, and the VP for research proposed to this committee, let's have 1,000 citation club. Anyone on campus who has 1,000 citations, they'll get a free meal every year. They'll be celebrated. There'll be pictures of them. And that will incentivize people to publish things that get cited at least 1,000 times.
Oh my God.
I took out my phone and I Googled Shakespeare sonnets, which according to scholar at Google have been cited about 100 times. And I pointed this out. And they changed it into a university research, scientific, and academic and artistic achievement award. So that if you had a Fulbright, a Pulitzer, etc., some other metric, which could include 1,000 citations, and you could be invited to this annual dinner. But that just means it's hierarchy all the way down. We don't have to go anywhere else to find those hierarchies operating all the time.
Yeah.
But I think that your project is in your little story. They are huge consequential story, but that I've mentioned, that's going to give you the funding. That's going to find you people who will now up your response rates for your requests and buy you the time you're going to need to do this.
Can I tell an anecdote related to this COVID statistic? One of the participants in the workshop that I gave to Kenyan researchers was conducting this little offshoot study about COVID rates in his a study he was conducting on kind of public health and personal hygiene measures related to equatorial waterborne diseases. And lo and behold, COVID rates were much lower for the trial group. People who had dysentery and other diseases. So, he had this really important COVID related finding and couldn't get it written up or published. So, I mean, the contributions to global science for one of the biggest kind of catastrophic pandemics of our time are so meaningful, and yet being silenced.
I remember when there was the Disney outbreak of measles, one of the meetings that I absolutely loved was all we can do is shelter in place and wait for Nigerian aid. Because they are medically doing much better than we are on these fronts. But we don't wait for the Nigerian research. Right. We don't turn to the Nigerian research and say, what are they doing that's working that we're not doing?
Right.
also not English. It helps no Greek and Latin to publish.
In English, yeah.
Yeah,
Because,
so-called English.
Yeah.
The higher ranked journals are actually going to require a huge amount of Greek, Latin, German that helps them. It's a very strange English. It's not a vernacular English.
it's not exactly, it's not.
It's
It's that hard.
Science speak.
You got a phenomenal study on your hands.
Thank you all so much for your suggestions. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Opening up our.
I'll just say that we're starting small. We're really interested in the human experience. So this is very much exploratory. The conversation we had was, as I said, incredibly illuminating, and we just want to start collecting other experiences. So we'll keep you posted. Thank you for your interest. Thank you. Take our picture. Before you take the screen down, would you mind putting it up for one quick second? And I'm gonna ask a friend to take our photo. Thank you so much.
Any particular.
Yeah.
So I started to
Oh, yeah.
We're in front of this list, so we've got.
Let me make sure this goes away.
Oh, there you go. That's good. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. It's no, thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right, I gotta get on the road. Yeah. Happy trail here. The problem. Nah, I gotta go. I'm done. It's amazing. Yeah. I know. I missed it. So I mean, I have problems. Yes. Not living here.
Questions, but you guys probably.
English major.